Holness calls Traoré a dictator. His reply shattered the internet. Hello, friends. Sometimes the sharpest wars are fought without a single bullet, only words. In a world already divided between democracy and defiance, one sentence from Jamaica's Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, set the stage for a global clash. During a live political broadcast, Holness pointed across the Atlantic and branded Burkina Faso's young leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, with a name few dare to speak aloud: Dictator. But what happened next stunned the world. Traoré didn't defend. He didn't deny. Instead, his 5-word reply, "I am better than you," ignited a storm that swept from Kingston to Ouagadougou. Tonight, we explore how a single exchange between two distant nations revealed the battle lines of modern leadership itself. Dear friends, on that night, the air in Jamaica's capital buzzed with tension. Cameras rolled, microphones glistened, and world leaders tuned in from across continents. When Prime Minister Andrew Holness was asked about global leadership, no one expected him to name names. Yet his response came without pause. Calm, deliberate, and cutting. Ibrahim Traoré is a dictator. It was a sentence that sliced through diplomatic silence like a blade. The audience froze. The moderators hesitated. Even seasoned journalists couldn't believe what they had just heard. In politics, calling another head of state a dictator is no small matter. It is a declaration that goes beyond opinion. It's a moral judgment. And Holness, known for his cautious tone, had just crossed a line that few leaders dare approach. Across the ocean in Burkina Faso, the statement landed like an explosion. Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old military officer who had seized power in 2022, was no stranger to controversy. To his supporters, he was Africa's new Sankara, a young visionary fighting Western influence and rebuilding a nation battered by terrorism. To his critics, he was a soldier who traded ballots for bullets, a man consolidating power while silencing opposition. Holness's words reached Ouagadougou within hours. Advisors urged caution. Diplomats suggested a neutral statement. But Traoré, known for his fiery speeches and disdain for scripted diplomacy, chose confrontation over calm. The next day, during a televised address, he faced the cameras, expression unreadable, and said only 5 words: "I am better than you." It was not just an answer, it was an earthquake. Those words ricocheted through the global stage. They carried defiance, pride, and challenge. Traoré had flipped the accusation back on the accuser, rejecting not only the insult but the entire moral authority behind it. In his view, he was better because he acted decisively, free from what he saw as Western puppetry. Better because he fought imperialism head-on while others waited for approval. Within hours, hashtags trended across social media. Hashtag better than you, hashtag Holness versus Traoré, hashtag dictator debate. Twitter threads turned into battlegrounds. Comment sections became arenas of ideology. In Kingston, reactions were split. Supporters of Holness applauded him for defending democratic values. One radio caller declared, "Our Prime Minister just stood up for every free nation." Editorials praised his courage, arguing that silence in the face of authoritarianism is complicity. But not everyone agreed. Other voices warned that Jamaica had just waded into waters far deeper than it realized. "We gain nothing by provoking an African military leader," one pundit argued. "We have our own battles: poverty, inequality, corruption. Why start a war of words we can't finish?" Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, Traoré's words ignited celebration. Crowds gathered in the streets, waving flags, chanting, "He is better." Local media framed the exchange as proof that Africa no longer bows to Western-aligned critics. One commentator on state radio declared, "When they call him a dictator, they mean he cannot be controlled." Across the globe, analysts tried to decode what had just happened. To some, Holness's comment represented the voice of a small democracy standing for principle. To others, it symbolized a fading world order, one where leaders like him still believe legitimacy is measured by elections, not by action. But what made this moment truly explosive was what it revealed. a widening divide in how the world defines leadership. On one side stood Holness, defender of the democratic tradition, where authority is earned through the ballot box and bound by constitutional limits. On the other stood Traore, the self-styled revolutionary, claiming that legitimacy comes from courage, sovereignty, and results. It wasn't just Jamaica versus Burkina Faso, it was democracy versus defiance. Political scientists began calling it the symbolic clash of systems. News anchors replayed the exchange on loop. Talk shows in Africa debated whether democracy was still relevant in a world where elected governments often failed to deliver basic security. Caribbean commentators countered that strongmen may promise freedom, but often end up delivering fear. And yet, beneath the noise, both leaders struck a nerve. Holness had voiced the concern of many who fear the global rise of military rule. Traore had embodied the frustration of millions who feel democracy has become a disguise for dependency. The world watched as two narratives collided, and neither side blinked. Weeks passed. Neither man apologized. Neither softened his tone. Holness doubled down, saying that democracy cannot fear the truth. Traore, in turn, reminded his people that freedom is not granted by elections but earned through struggle. The clash became more than personal. It became generational. Young Africans began quoting Traore as an example of resistance. Meanwhile, Caribbean youth questioned whether democracy without economic justice truly equaled freedom. Even Western analysts admitted the debate was exposing uncomfortable truths. Could democracy survive if it no longer delivered dignity? Could revolutionary movements build lasting peace without repression? As the dust settled, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a political quarrel. It was a philosophical reckoning. Andrew Holness had thrown the first stone, but Ibrahim Traoré turned it into a mirror, forcing the world to ask which form of power it respects most. Legitimacy earned through consent or control, maintained through conviction. Both men, in their own ways, became symbols. Holness, the disciplined defender of democracy. Traoré, the defiant face of sovereignty. And the silence that followed their exchange spoke louder than their words. The battle of ballots versus boldness had begun. In the end, no one won the argument, but both changed the conversation. Andrew Holness reminded the world that democracy still matters, that freedom without accountability is only illusion. Ibrahim Traoré reminded the world that independence means little if it must be approved by others. Between them, a truth emerged. Leadership today is not about titles, but about conviction. The courage to speak, to defy, to risk everything for what one believes is right. Their clash was not the end of diplomacy, but the beginning of a new era where words, not wars, redraw the lines of power. The world watched two men from two continents and saw, reflected in their defiance, its own struggle to decide what freedom truly means.